Being born at the beginning of the academic or sporting year gives you an advantage that you can't control, and actually gives a disadvantage to those people born at the end of the academic year. So those born Q1, so quarter one in America, that would be January, February, March. In the UK, that would be September, October, and November. Those individuals born in Q1 have the advantage. Those born in Q4 have a disadvantage, and this is known as the relative age effect. The relative age effect has been extensively researched in specifically youth sports, so football, basketball, rugby, but also seen in school and academic success, and in self-esteem in youth individuals, and also in business and other areas of general life like cognitive and non-cognitive skill development. Maturation is the biggest factor to consider when thinking about the relative age effect. Physical maturation being the first and most obvious one that people think about. Those born at the beginning of the academic year are going to go through puberty earlier on average, so they're going to be bigger, faster, stronger, more coordinated, quicker than those born at the end of the academic year, which gives them an advantage because when they're playing sport, they're bigger, faster, stronger, and they are better. And the same can be said in academics as well. Now, with physical maturation, you can be an early maturer or a late maturer. So some people go through puberty earlier than others, some later than others. So just because you're born in Q1 doesn't mean you're going to be an early maturer. You could be born Q1, so at the beginning of the year, meaning you might be developing earlier, but you're actually a late maturer, which could mean you actually develop later on in the year, and vice versa. You could be a Q4 individual, so you're born in the later part of the year, but you could be an early maturer, so you mature earlier on in the year, giving you an advantage. But on average, those born in Q1 will be bigger, stronger, faster, earlier than those in Q4, but there are some nuances in there. Then there is cognitive maturity, emotional maturity, social maturity, all of which aren't as measurable as physical maturity, but still play a role. So cognitive maturity, some individuals born at the beginning of the year are more likely to ask questions, get more curious, and find out more, start learning more earlier on, because they have a more cognitive mature mind to ask those questions before those born in Q4, giving them a small advantage. Again, nuance involved. Then emotional maturity, so those born at the beginning of the year will have experienced more things in life, so maybe they've experienced more emotions, so they can control them a little bit better. Maybe being scared, winning, losing, dealing with different feelings may become easier earlier on for those born at the beginning of the year rather than those born at the later part of the year. Again, nuance included. And then social maturity, those born at the beginning of the year, maybe they're talking earlier, they're talking to more people, they're more confident to talk to other people, or maybe because they started going to school earlier on, they've already got groups of friends, so those born in Q4 are coming in and they need to find a group. So maybe social maturity is actually easier for those in Q1 compared to Q4. Now, all these levels of maturity will develop, will grow, will change, and will be individual because environments, home environments may change how we develop, school environments may change, maybe you move place, you move school, you move country, you change languages, and all of these different developmental elements will impact how quickly or slowly you develop. But on average, if you have someone that's born at the beginning of the year, they are more likely to experience all of these check marks earlier on than those born in Q4, which gives them this relative age effect advantage. Now, the relative age effect and this advantage I keep talking about is mainly down to comparison, which is talent identification, mainly in sport, talent ID, being gifted and talented, but also in academics, being gifted and talented at an academic subject. And the relative age effect starts by comparing individuals and trying to identify ability and talent early on. This talent identification can then potentially lead on to other things like self-fulfilling prophecy, which occurs when there is a false belief followed by a new behavior grounded on that false belief, which eventually makes the previously false conception come true. In practical examples, there are two different types of self-fulfilling prophecy, the Gallaty effect and the Pygmalion effect. The Gallaty effect, self-fulfilling prophecy, is where someone's own expectations of themselves are high, and then they have actions and behaviors that are going to improve their ability to do something. So they think they're good at something, they train, they practice, they get better at something, so they improve, but their actual ability, the belief at the beginning, their actual ability to start with was actually quite low. But because they thought they were good, they improved, got better, and therefore they actually became quite good because of that false belief, the self-fulfilling prophecy. The Pygmalion effect effects works in pretty much the same way. There is a false belief at the start from external expectations. So that could be a parent, a coach, a teacher. They think that an individual is quite good. So there are behaviors that are put on the individual to help them. Maybe more lessons, more teaching, more instruction, more feedback. And that feedback, therefore, improves their ability to do whatever it is because of the expectations. So they get better, even though they may not be that good to start with. And of course, both of these effects work the other way around. So high expectations to start with can improve performance, which makes them better, but low expectations to start with can actually lead to poor behaviors, which leads to poor performance, even though the potential talent at the start may be exactly the same. High expectations, low expectations, different results. Then there is the Matthew effect that also plays a role in relative age effect, which is where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. An example that is used in reading from education is if you have two individuals. One individual is very good at reading, one individual is not very good at reading. The person that is good at reading is more likely to read more books and enjoy what's going on. So they're going to get better at reading, and that growth, that development is going to start to increase as time goes on. The individual that isn't that interested in reading, isn't that good at reading, doesn't like reading, doesn't learn to enjoy reading as much, they still get better with practice, but they don't do as much practice. They don't try as hard, so they still improve, but not as much. So the gap gets bigger and bigger as the time goes on because of where they started and the actions that are done during the time that may have changed. Now, there are lots of different moving parts in the relative age effect, but one example, one theoretical model that has been shown in the sports coaching context actually shows this in a diagram. So at the diagram at the bottom, you have the relative age effect, whether it is a positive or a negative, whether there is an effect or whether there isn't an effect. Now, it starts off with talent ID. So you have the talent pool. That is the group of individuals people have seen, the teacher has seen, the coach has seen, and the coach has expectations from that talent pool. That's where the talent ID starts off this relative age effect. So coaches start to build up external expectations on individuals. That's the talent ID. They start to guess whether someone is going to be good or not so good at the sport, at the lesson, at the subject, whatever it is. And those external expectations are the Pygmalion effect, and those conversations may start to trickle over to the parents. Coaches talking to parents, teachers talking to parents, and this is where the Matthew effect starts to play a role in the relative age effect, because those parents hear the coach's external expectations and think they could be quite good. They put them into more classes. Maybe they're doing more sport now. Maybe they're doing different sports. So the Matthew effect starts to play a role because those individuals that have high expectations, take one individual, they have high expectations, they start doing more football, more rugby, more sport, because there's high expectations. That's the Matthew effect, because now they're doing 4 hours a week at 4 years old, whereas the individual that didn't look too promising talent ID to start with, so low expectations from the coach, low expectations then diverted over to the parent, so the parent goes, okay, they're doing okay, we'll keep them in session, so they'll do 1 hour a week. So now one individual's got 4 hours a week training, one's got 1 hour a week training, and that is the Matthew effect, impacting the relative age effect. Then there is the coach-athlete interaction. So the coach has got these external expectations on the individual, on the athlete, and that is the Pygmalion effect interacting with the self-fulfilling prophecy, interacting with the athlete, and that is where if there are high expectations, the athlete may think, oh, I'm getting all of this good feedback. That's then going to feed the Galatea effect, which is the athlete's individual expectations of themselves, which then feeds into the relative age effect. So an individual that has high expectations from the coach, Pygmalion effect, high expectations from themselves, Galatea effect, they get better. So coming from the talent pool, if someone gets picked out, first quarter individual, big, strong, looking very good, talent ID, lots of expectations, lots of high expectations from the coach, Pygmalion effect affecting the athlete, so they get more training, they get more time to do something and get more feedback. Their expectations, the athlete's expectations, therefore improves, which Galatea effect, they get better, so the first quarter individual gets better. The fourth quarter individual that didn't have very high expectations, Pygmalion effect affecting the athlete, lower behaviors, lower attitudes towards getting better. Galatea effect, again, low expectations, again, reinforcing negative, not necessarily negative, just not as much improvement as the first quarter, so the relative age effect is now increased. And the same thing happens on the other side of this triangle with the parent. Parent expectations, the same thing. High expectations are going to increase performance. High expectations, therefore, for the individual, and therefore the first quarter individual that has been talent ID'd is more likely to get better earlier, quicker, faster than Q4. But of course, the relative age effect doesn't happen in every situation, in every sport, in every subject. And actually, unpopular sports or non-competitive sports or sports with less individuals are less likely to have the relative age effect because that talent ID, that talent pool is affected. If there are 10 individuals and you need 10 individuals, all 10 will be picked. All 10 will be coached and trained. But if you have a popular talent pool of 30 individuals and you need to pick 10, well, you're going to pick the 10 best, most talented that you see, which are more likely to be the first quarter individuals. So you're less likely to see a relative age effect in unpopular sports and also female sports because there are typically lower numbers, lower participation numbers in female sports. So females are less likely to see the relative age effect. Having said that though, popular female sports may see the relative age effect. This is something that could be seen or could not be seen depending on how talent ID is in the sport. So the relative age effect may actually kind of do the opposite for other sports. So less popular sports may see more Q4 individuals because, well, they can't get involved in the first sport, so let's do the second sport. So you have a different distribution of individuals depending on how popular a sport may be or how competitive a sport may be. Now, this could be a pro or a con, but what this does mean is talent ID is impacting potential participation for certain sports. Some people that are Q4 individuals may be extremely gifted and talented, depending on how you define those terms, at a sport, but because they're not big enough yet, they choose to do something else instead. But we won't know that they're good at that until they've had time to catch up and develop physically, emotionally, cognitively, socially, etc. The same correlation has actually been seen in education. Those in the first set, the second set are more likely to be first quarter, second quarter individuals because they've asked questions, they're more curious earlier on, so they are so-called smarter because they are asking these questions. They're getting better grades. So individuals in first quarter are smarter, getting better grades, doing better and going to university. Those in fourth quarter are in the lower set, not because they're not as smart or not as intelligent, but because they maybe haven't had some of the advantages that the relative age effect has given them in school. Maybe teachers didn't think they were that good. Their third set, I won't try as hard. It's not very nice to say, but I have experienced that personally on my side. I was first set for a lot of things. Second set, you're treated completely differently. But you shouldn't be. And as soon as we consider expectations, of course, you can have high expectations which could lead to stress, burnout, dropout. Now, that actually links with early specialization and talent identification in youth sport development, but that's a whole nother topic of conversation. But for this topic specifically, those individuals that are Q4 that do manage to get through that hard work, the struggles, everything that they had to do to get there, because they are smaller, they're getting shrugged off the ball, but maybe they're technically gifted, they have managed to get through that development stage, they're actually more likely to see success. The Q4 individuals have a higher chance of professional chances, playing more, better performances, higher salaries, less injuries, and longer careers, potentially due to the underdog effect. Now, like most of science, there is lots and lots of nuance. There's loads of pros, cons, synthesis, critiques, and lots of different ways that you can actually use or manipulate the relative age effect in positive and negative ways. But what we do know is that in popular sports like football, there are biases. There are slight biases towards those Q1 individuals, giving them potential advantages. So things like biobanding and birthday banding are actually being tested in sport. Biobanding is essentially categorizing individuals by their biological maturity age. So what they do is one example is they take a percentage of their adult height. So they are 80% of adult height, they're 90% of adult height, and they match those people together. So instead of it being chronological age, it's biological age. And what this means is you could have someone that's 13 years old, an early maturer, and they're really, really old, matched up with a 15-year-old that's a late maturer. So the 13-year-old early maturer and 15-year-old late maturer physically are around the same height, same level, same physical maturity level, but their chronological age is 2 years different. And then of course you can have the opposite, and what biobanding tries to do is tries to prevent the bigger grown-up individual and the shorter, smaller individual going against one another, because I'm sure many of you have seen the 13-year-olds and 14-year-old boys that just bulldoze everyone over because they're going through puberty earlier. That's just not fair. As someone that personally felt the brunt brunt of all of that physicality. I was a late developer. I was born Q1, but I was a late developer, so I was small, and I still am small, but I was beaten to death playing rugby. I always lost. I always lost the fights. And birthday banding is a different way of categorizing individuals in similar to biobanding, but it's done by birthday. So you could be the oldest or the youngest. You could be the oldest in your group, and then it's your birthday, and now it's your youngest because you've moved up because it's your birthday. So your oldest and youngest, allowing you to change between maturation levels, physical, cognitive, social, emotional, etc. Now, the learning and development environment in sport and in academics is always going to change. There are loads of nuances, loads of environmental factors, and it's multifaceted. It's almost impossible to control, but what we can do is control how we ID talent. And there was actually a couple of studies that have shown that if you just acknowledge what the relative age is, it actually changes talent ID and potentially identifying individuals that are more likely to progress further in the future. And an example of this, a perfect example of this, Lionel Messi. He was small, he was a Q4 individual, very small. I believe he also has a growth hormone defect as well, but very small, and he was told, "You'll never be a good footballer, you're too small." Well, look at that now. Lionel Messi, not good at football, excuse me. So some of the lessons that I take from understanding the relative age effect, the Pygmalion effect, Galatea effect, Matthew effect, is that there are loads of expectations that other people and us put on ourselves that can affect our own development and other people's development. So looking at talent ID and giving a fair comparison when comparing individuals maybe at school or at sport or in an environment, is it a fair comparison? If you've got someone that's been playing an instrument for 10 years but they're 10 years old, and someone that's 20 years old but have been playing the instrument for 1 year, it's not a fair comparison. So before making a comparison between yourself and others, between others and whoever, understand what is actually going on behind the scenes before you make a judgment too quick. Out of curiosity, I would love to hear some of your stories from potentially using the relative age effect or just physical maturation differences in your year group. Maybe there was someone that was really big or someone that was really small and they actually came out to be really good or came out to be really bad. It'd be really interesting to hear some of your stories and how the relative age effect may have played a role in your education.